You're not listed as combat wounded. I'm afraid we must ask you to leave the honorary section. That's what they told her, right after her scar showed beneath her white shirt and a cadet snickered, calling it a failed plastic job. She stood up in silence. Then a retired general's voice echoed from the podium, interrupting the entire ceremony. I shot her. Syria, 2008. Friendly fire. That scar on her chest. It's haunted me every day since. Everyone turned. Everything stopped. So tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Biker, where buried truths rise and dignity is reclaimed. The letter came on a Tuesday. No return address, no postmark, just a single envelope tucked into the mailbox between bills and a coupon flyer. The handwriting was crisp, military style, slant ed, ND exact. Inside was a simple sheet of white stationery. Only one sentence had been written. We both know the scar wasn't your fault. It's time. Captain Mira Dawson stared at the words for a long time, seated at her kitchen table, a half-filled mug of black coffee cooling by her elbow. Her fingers brushed the faint lines beneath the ink, as if searching for fingerprints, for context, for anything that would anchor the note to something real, something she could process. It had been 15 years. 15 years since Syria, 15 years since the fire, the chaos, the silence that followed, since the government buried her file and sent her home with a discharge and a whispered thank you. She hadn't worn a uniform since, hadn't stood on a base, saluted a flag, or spoken to anyone from those days. Until now. She folded the note and placed it back in the envelope, her breath catching. It wasn't signed, but she had a guess. The next day, an official invitation arrived in the mail, embossed gold lettering on thick cardstock, Valor Beyond Borders, annual memorial for fallen aviators. And there it was again, that insistent nudge of fate, or guilt, or both. She didn't want to go, didn't belong there. Not among the legends, not after what happened. But the letter wouldn't leave her alone. Sunday morning came too soon. Mira stepped out of the Uber at the Arlington Air Force Memorial, the sun just beginning to crest over the stone arc. The ceremonial field stretched wide, lined with folding chairs, a stage, and banners flapping in the early breeze. The air smelled of grass, brass polish, and anticipation. She wore a pressed white blouses, navy blue skirt just past the knee, and low heels. No medals, no ribbons, just fabric and silence. Her shoulder-length blonde hair was neatly brushed, tucked behind one ear. Her eyes, a stormy blue, scanned the field as she clutched her small clutch purse. The ushers nodded at her name on the list. She was seated near the front, in the honorary veterans section, first row, third chair from the aisle. She nodded politely, ignoring the curious glances. No one recognized her. That was fine. 10 minutes before the ceremony started, a frail voice nearby mumbled, "Damn glasses slipped again." Mira turned to see an elderly man fumbling for his spectacles, white-haired tan jacket with faded pilot wings stitched above the heart, probably World War II. She knelt without hesitation. "Let me help you with those, sir," she said. He smiled, shaky but grateful. As she adjusted the glasses on his nose, a gust of wind caught the edges of her blouse. The top button had slipped undone, just enough for a thin scar to show, a pale, clean line that started from her collarbone and disappeared below fabric. A voice nearby muttered, not quietly enough, "Looks like a botched boob job." Snickers, not many, but loud enough. Cadets by the looks of it, fresh uniforms, polished shoes, oversized egos. Mira stood slowly, refastening her blouse. She didn't look at them, didn't respond, but others had noticed. Whispers began to spread, not about the scar, about her. 15 minutes in, a man in a blue suit approached her, polite but firm, clipboard in hand. "Captain Dawson," she looked up. "We're so sorry, but we've had a discrepancy with our seating. It appears your record doesn't show any combat-related injury. I'm afraid these seats are reserved strictly for decorated wounded veterans. We have an alternate row just behind that I can escort you to." She blinked. The sentence burned. Decorated. Wounded. As if scars only mattered when accompanied by metal. The crowd wasn't paying attention. Not yet. But eyes were starting to drift. A few cadets leaned in. The man didn't offer his name, just stood there, gesturing. Mira didn't argue. She stood. But before she could take a step, the elderly man beside her, Mr. Ellis Monroe, rose with effort. "If she doesn't sit here," he said, voice brittle but clear, "then I don't either." Mira turned in surprise. The man's hands trembled, but his spine was straight. The usher paused, awkward. "Sir, please, we'll sort this quickly." "No," Ellis said, "no sorting. That woman's got a scar on her chest, bigger than the one on my leg from Okinawa. Don't you dare move her." More heads turned. Now the cameras were catching on. Mira opened her mouth to speak, to diffuse it, to keep it quiet, but another voice beat her to it. One that came from the stage. General Randall Kane had left the podium. He stood at the edge of the steps, microphone still in hand, voice carried clearly across the lawn. "She stays where she is," he said. Silence. Mira froze. Kane's eyes locked on hers. "I shot her," he said. "Syria. 2008. Friendly fire. It was my command. Classified mission. You won't find it in any file. But the scar, the one you dismissed, it haunts me every damn day." The crowd gasped, and just like that the memorial changed forever. There was no script for what followed. No teleprompter could anticipate it. General Randall Kane's voice lingered in the air like smoke from a shot that had finally found its echo. The microphone in his hand trembled just enough for the cameras to catch it. The crowd, hundreds deep, hushed into a stunned silence that blanketed the entire memorial field. Mira Dawson didn't move. The sound of her breath was suddenly louder than anything else. For a fraction of a second, she considered sitting down. Or walking out, but something deeper kept her rooted to that spot. Perhaps it was the way the general's voice cracked on the word haunts, or maybe it was Ellis Monroe's hand, now lightly touching her elbow, as if anchoring her to something steadier than the shifting air around them. A woman in the crowd broke the silence with a slow clap, then another, then a wave of applause, hesitant at first but swelling with each heartbeat. Not for the general, not yet, but for the moment, for truth surfacing where protocol had tried to bury it. Kane stepped down from the stage fully. Mira watched as the man who had been nothing more than a name on a blurred page in her old debriefing file walked toward her, uniformed, decorated, and deeply human. "May I?" he asked softly. Mira looked at the chair beside hers, the one the usher had tried to relocate her from. She nodded once. The general sat down, and for the first time in 15 years, they were face to face. "It was a drone strike," he said, voice pitched just for her. "You were listed as hostile. Intel failed. I failed." Mira didn't respond immediately. Her face, pale beneath the rising heat, gave nothing away. "I remember the heat," she finally said. "The sound before the blast, a hum, then nothing, then fire." He bowed his head. "We tried to recover the mission logs, but it was deep black. I submitted 3 written reports, all redacted, all buried. You disappeared in the system. I thought you were dead." Mira swallowed. "I was. For 3 minutes, then someone pulled me out. I never saw his face." Kane looked up sharply. "He carried me across 2 clicks of rock and debris. I woke up in a field unit in Jordan. They stabilized me, then told me to forget everything." He nodded slowly. "They do that when mistakes get expensive." A pause. Then he reached into his jacket. Mira stiffened, but all he pulled out was a small notebook, leather-bound, worn at the edges. He flipped to a marked page. "I write your initials in this every year," he said. "October 19th, the day I pulled the trigger. 1 line, MD Syria, friendly scar. Mira's lips parted, but no sound came. He closed the book, then looked out over the audience, now murmuring again as the ceremony tried to regain structure. I can't give you a medal, can't change the records, but you deserve your seat. You earned it the second you stood back up. I never fell, she said, and that finally made him smile. Cadet Josh Keller stood frozen behind a camera tripod. The live stream was still running. The comments section on the broadcast had exploded. Hashtag Scaran Herchist was trending. He lowered the camera, ashamed, but someone nearby, a fellow cadet, whispered, "Dude, you got that on tape?" He did. The footage of Mira rising, the crowd gasping, and the general's confession would soon circulate in every veteran community from coast to coast. The ceremony resumed. Though the script had long since unraveled, the MC returned to the microphone, voice shaking slightly as he tried to transition into the next memorial reading. Mira remained seated, eyes forward, jaw set. She heard none of the speeches. Her mind had tunneled back to the dust of the Syrian hills, to the chaos of her last mission, to the moment the sky had opened and swallowed her team. She remembered crawling through flame, her chest searing with pain, the world tilted sideways, sounds muffled. She remembered the scar forming in weeks, cutting across muscle, branding her forever. But no one had ever spoken of it. No one had acknowledged it until now. Until this morning, after the final names were read, taps were played over the loudspeakers. The crowd stood in unison. Mira rose with them. She turned to leave quietly, but was intercepted by a woman in uniform, Colonel Jeanette Long, Public Affairs. "Captain Dawson, would you come with me for a moment? The Secretary of the Air Force would like a word." Mira blinked. She was led behind the stage, past a row of white tents and security personnel. Inside one tent stood a tall woman in a grey suit, flanked by aides. She turned as Mira entered. "Captain Dawson, I'm Secretary Hayes. Thank you for being here." Mira nodded, cautious. Hayes gestured to a chair. "Please, I'll be brief. You made an impression today, not just on the crowd, on all of us." "I didn't do anything," Mira said. "You existed. That was enough. The truth has weight, Captain, and it travels." Mira raised an eyebrow. Hayes continued, "We can't undo what was buried, but we can lift it. We'd like your help." "Doing what?" "Helping us reach others, veterans like you, those who fell through the cracks, who were silenced." Mira looked down at her hands. The scar beneath her blouse pulsed faintly, not with pain but with purpose. "I'm not a hero," she said. "No," Hayes replied. "You're something rarer. You're proof." Outside, the crowd had dispersed, but a small group remained, mostly young airmen, cadets, and a few retirees. One of them, a young woman in ROTC gear, approached timidly. "Captain Dawson?" Mira turned. "My mom served. She had a scar like yours. Never talked about it. They said it wasn't worth a medal." Mira looked at her. It was. The cadet smiled, and in that moment something shifted in Mira's chest. Not the scar, the silence around it. It was finally breaking. And this time it wasn't hers to carry alone. 3 days after the ceremony, Mira Dawson sat alone in her apartment, the television muted, news coverage flashing silently across the screen. Every major network had replayed the moment. General Randall Kane confessing to friendly fire, Mira's scar revealed, the crowd's stunned reaction. The world had turned her pain into a headline. She didn't know how to feel about that. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. Hundreds had poured in since Sunday. Former service members, strangers, even cadets who had laughed that day. Some apologized. Some shared their own scars. Some just said, "Thank you." Mira didn't respond to most. Not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't find words that wouldn't shatter her composure. She'd lived with silence for 15 years. Words felt too sharp now. The doorbell rang. She rose cautiously, heart thudding, and opened the door to find a delivery man holding a small flat package. No sender listed, just a return label marked as classified. She signed, closed the door, and brought it to the table. When she opened the wrapping, she found a manila envelope inside. No letter, just a single dog tag on a chain, scuffed and dented. Her name is engraved on it, her breath caught, the one she'd lost the day of the blast. The back of the tag had something new scratched into the metal, still standing. RC. She swallowed hard. Later that night, Mira sat in front of her laptop and pulled up the live stream footage. Not the clip everyone had seen, but the raw feed archived by the ceremony organizers. It ran for 2 hours. She skipped to the moment the usher approached, watched her own body rise from the seat, watched Ellis Monroe speak, watched Kane descend the stairs. Her expression didn't change much, but her hands gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. She paused the video, rewound, played it again. This time, she noticed something else. Behind her, in the crowd, a man in civilian clothes had risen to his feet, just as Kane confessed. He didn't clap, didn't film, just stood there, eyes fixed on her. Then he turned and walked away. She zoomed in, grainy image, beard, sunglasses, ball cap, no insignia. But something about the posture sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know why, but she felt sure he wasn't there to mourn. The next day, she took a walk. Her neighborhood in Arlington was quiet, lined with old oaks and brick townhouses. Mira kept to herself, nodding at the occasional jogger or dog walker. Today, though, she wore her old USAF sweatshirt, the faded emblem barely visible. She didn't mean to make a statement. She just hadn't done the laundry. A voice called from across the street. "Hey, Captain Dawson!" She turned. A teenage boy waved from his bike, helmet tilted awkwardly on his head. "Saw you on the news. My uncle served in Fallujah. He said what you did took guts." She forced a small smile. "Tell him thank you for his service. He already knows, but I'll tell him anyway." The boy rode off. She stood there for a long moment before continuing her walk. Something about that brief exchange grounded her more than the speeches or interviews. Later that afternoon, she visited a small bookstore downtown, a hole-in-the-wall place that smelled of paper and history. As she browsed the military memoirs section, she heard a familiar voice. "Didn't think I'd find you here." She turned to see Randall Kane, dressed in a civilian blazer and jeans, looking oddly out of place among the dusty shelves. "How did you?" He smiled faintly. "I called in a favor. You left a trace when you ordered that worn copy of Ghosts of Kandahar." She raised an eyebrow. "I owe you lunch," he added. "You owe me a lot more than that. Fair. But lunch is a start." They walked down the block to a quiet cafe. The staff didn't recognize them, which Mira appreciated. They sat by the window. "You weren't supposed to say anything," she said once their food arrived. "I know. So why did you?" Kane looked down at his coffee. "Because it's been killing me. Every time I gave a speech, every time I handed out a medal, I thought about you, about what I buried to keep the system running." She stirred her tea. "What happens now? There's noise in DC. Politicians asking for inquiries, reviews. They want names, dates. And you?" He met her gaze. "I want peace for you, for me, maybe for all the ghosts." She studied him for a long time, then nodded. When Mira returned home that evening, she found a letter taped to her front door. No stamp, just her name written in black ink. She opened it inside. The message was typed, "You were supposed to disappear. Stay quiet. Some of us risked everything to make that happen. Stay down, or we'll remind you why silence was safer." No signature. Mira read the letter twice. Then she folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer beside the dog tag, and locked it. Then she opened her laptop and began writing. Not a memoir, a report for the Secretary of the Air Force, with names, coordinates, dates, details only she could provide. She didn't know if it would be buried again, but this time she was going to send it anyway. The report took Mira 2 days to finish, 43 pages, not including the 6 annexes. She wrote, without breaks, without music, barely stopping for food. Every detail came back with chilling clarity. The mission briefings, the false intel from a private contractor, the changed coordinates sent to her unit moments before deployment. She remembered the voice on the comms urging them forward. The sudden silence before the sky split open. The pain, the burn, the cold. She attached old photos, marked up maps she'd kept for years, scribbled notes in the margins from a journal she once tried to forget. She redacted nothing. No names were spared. Her signature went on the bottom of the last page. Then she encrypted it, copied it to 2 secure drives, and walked it in person to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. The man who took the envelope wore a clean suit and a neutral expression. He didn't thank her, didn't smile, just nodded and said, "You'll be contacted." She left the building with a strange calm, not relief, not vindication, just clarity, like breathing clean air after too long in a sealed room. That night, her doorbell rang again. She froze, checked the peephole. "Randall," she opened it. "You sent it, didn't you?" She nodded. "They're going to fight it." "You know that. I'm counting on it." He studied her a moment, then offered a grim smile. "You should come to the press forum tomorrow. The secretary's making a statement. Might be wise to be seen." Mira considered, then said, "I'm not a symbol. You're already more than that. You're precedent." The press forum was held in a white tent pavilion on Joint Base Andrews. The crowd was thick with journalists, flashing cameras, and military officials who had perfected the art of saying nothing. Secretary Hayes took the stage, flanked by 2 generals. Mira stood off to the side, behind a curtain, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that felt too tight across the shoulders. Hayes began with acknowledgements. Then came the pivot. Recent events have brought to light incidents that were never meant to remain hidden. We owe our veterans not just remembrance, but recognition. We have begun a formal review of cases previously deemed non-combat injuries. That review begins today. A journalist raised a hand. "Is this related to Captain Mira Dawson's case?" Hayes didn't flinch. "It's inspired by it, but it goes far beyond one individual." The crowd buzzed. Later, in a quiet hallway outside the press area, Mira stood with Hayes. "You're going to be a target," Hayes said. "Political, institutional, possibly worse. I already am. You'll have protection, discreet but constant. We've also reopened your security clearance. If you're willing, we want you to consult on oversight reforms." Mira nodded slowly. "You'll get my terms in writing. We expected that." They shook hands. That evening, Mira returned home to find a small envelope slid under her door. Inside, a photo, grainy, zoomed from a distance. She walked into the OSI building 2 days ago. On the back, a message scrawled in thick ink: "Stop digging. We're not ghosts. No signature, no return address." Mira burned the photo in the sink, then called Hayes. "The threats are escalating. We're tracking it, but we may need you to go dark for a while. Disappear until we can lock this down." "No, I won't hide." "Then don't be alone, and keep your phone on." Mira didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the hallway felt deliberate. Every passing car outside is too slow. She sat at the kitchen table with her service pistol on the counter, the dog tag next to it. Still standing. She repeated the words like a mantra. Still standing. 2 days later, Mira arrived at the Pentagon for a closed-door session with the Air Force Ethics Review Board. The room was colder than it should have been. 5 officers sat across from her. 1 civilian observer, a woman from the Department of Justice, watched silently. They asked questions for 3 hours, some fair, some barbed. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I was told not to." "By whom?" "Check the report. You have names. Do you have proof those orders were given? They came on encrypted comms. The system auto-purges. But the timestamps match the strike. You expect us to act on partial data? I expect you to act like officers. That silenced the room. They broke for lunch without dismissing her. Mira remained seated, alone. She wasn't sure if she'd won any ground. Outside, Randall waited in the corridor. "They're split," he said. "Half want to bury it again. The rest are waiting to see who blinks. Then I won't." He nodded. "I've got your 6. She managed a faint smile. The ethics board reconvened an hour later. This time the DOJ observer spoke. "Captain Dawson, under federal oversight protocols, we're prepared to escalate your testimony to a joint military to civilian inquiry. This may include subpoena power. Are you willing to cooperate fully?" "Yes, including testifying under oath before Congress if necessary, especially then." The lead officer cleared his throat. "We will review your report further. Expect a decision within the week. I'll be waiting." Mira Rose walked out, and for the first time since the ceremony, let herself breathe. The wind outside felt cleaner. She wasn't done, but she wasn't alone either. The congressional hearing wasn't supposed to happen for another month. That was the timeline originally laid out. Testimonies, closed-door briefings, background checks. But pressure from veteran groups, mounting media coverage, and a viral campaign under the hashtag #ScarenHurchis changed everything. Within 5 days, a committee was convened. Within 6, Mira Dawson was summoned to appear before them. She didn't ask for legal counsel. She didn't need a speechwriter. Her words were already etched into her bones. The hearing chamber on Capitol Hill was a high-ceilinged auditorium of cold lights and sharper eyes. Cameras lined the back walls. Rows of spectators, press, aides, and officials filled the seats. Some were there to watch her fall. Some were there to make sure she didn't. Mira sat in the witness chair in full uniform, not because she had to, but because she could. After 15 years, the Air Force had reinstated her active status for the purpose of this testimony. She sat straight, unflinching, hands folded on the table. Her scar, hidden beneath a ribbon, was as they once denied her. The chairman of the committee, a graying man from Ohio with a reputation for dodging controversy, adjusted his microphone. "Captain Dawson, thank you for your presence. We'll begin with your account of the events surrounding Operation Halberd, Syria, October 19th, 2008. Mira's voice didn't waver. For 45 minutes she detailed everything: the mission orders, the altered coordinates, the drone strike, the debriefing, the silencing. She named contractors, analysts, and field officers. She cited time logs, radio transcripts, and discrepancies in satellite data. She presented photographs of her scarred flight vest, singed boots, and the fragment of the drone casing she'd kept hidden for years. The room stayed quiet except for the rustle of notepaper and the tapping of keyboards. Captain Dawson, a senator, interrupted. "You claim your injury was omitted from official records intentionally. Do you have proof of a cover-up?" "Yes. The comm logs and the encryption keys I submitted show orders were deleted remotely 3 minutes after impact. That's not a glitch. That's a protocol." "And who authorized that deletion?" "Colonel Henry Wexler. At the time, he was stationed at CENTCOM. He now works as an executive at Elbridge Strategic Systems." The senator scribbled something furiously. Another voice chimed in. "Are you suggesting military decisions were influenced by private defense contractors?" "I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it. We have the records." Mira went on for 3 hours. No one interrupted again. When the hearing adjourned for lunch, Mira stepped outside onto the Capitol steps. A cold wind brushed her face. Cameras swarmed her immediately. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her testimony was already being dissected on every channel. Randall Kane was waiting by a column. He handed her a paper cup of coffee. "You did well. They're not done yet. No, but they're afraid. That's a start." She sipped quietly. What happens if they bury it again? He didn't answer, because they both knew what had to come next. That evening, Mira met with Secretary Hayes in a secure briefing room. 3 other people were present: her protection detail liaison, a digital forensics specialist, and an investigator from the Office of Inspector General. They pulled up satellite imagery, traffic camera data, and mobile ping traces. Whoever threatened you has access to high-level surveillance tools, the forensics agent said. We traced the photo back to a repurposed NSA subroutine, one that should have been decommissioned. So it's internal, Mira said. Not necessarily. Could be a contractor, could be rogue. Hayes nodded. We believe there's an unlisted group operating in parallel to our oversight structures. Possibly attached to Elbridge, possibly sanctioned under older counter-terror directives. You think they're still active? We know they are, and they know who you are. Mira leaned back. Then we make them show themselves. 2 nights later, Mira stood on a small stage at the Valor Integrity Gala, an annual fundraiser for injured veterans. She hadn't planned to speak, but the organizers insisted. The room was full of donors, officials, and hidden cameras. Randall stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the doors. Mira walked up to the microphone without notes. They told me silence was duty, that forgetting was survival, that a scar without a citation was just skin. They were wrong. The crowd was silent. The cost of truth isn't measured in medals. It's measured in what we're willing to risk to say it. And I'm not done talking. Applause erupted. Phones went up. Live streams buzzed. An hour later, in the parking garage, a man stepped out of the shadows. Mira reacted instantly. The man raised his hands. No weapon. Captain Dawson, they're coming for you. You've hurt the wrong people. Then you found the right one to hurt back. He dropped an envelope at her feet and ran. They couldn't catch him. Inside the envelope was a list. Names, codes, operations. Many had been redacted in her report. Not anymore. The next day, Mira delivered the envelope to Secretary Hayes. A full task force was activated, search warrants issued, subpoenas drafted. The name Elbridge Strategic Systems became the center of a federal investigation. Mira was assigned a liaison from the DOJ, a lawyer named Alana Reyes who spoke in clipped sentences and never blinked. If this moves to criminal charges, you'll need to be prepared to testify again, not just in Congress, in court, against men with deep connections. I'm ready. Then we'd better move fast. They won't sit idle. Within 48 hours, 2 former Elbridge executives disappeared. One was found dead in a cabin in Montana. The other vanished somewhere between Virginia and Qatar. A third attempted to flee the country but was arrested at Dulles. The news broke within minutes. The storm Mira had spent years avoiding was now fully overhead, but she didn't run. She had waited 15 years for someone to listen. Now the whole country was watching. Mira didn't expect the indictments to come so quickly. Within a week, the Department of Justice announced sealed charges against 5 individuals. 2 former Elbridge executives, 1 retired Air Force colonel, a tech contractor, and a sitting intelligence liaison. The charges ranged from obstruction of justice to destruction of military records and conspiracy to defraud the government. Though the names remained sealed to the public, Mira received a list. She recognized all of them. One had once shaken her hand after an award ceremony she wasn't allowed to attend. Another had signed off on the modified drone targeting software. They weren't faceless anymore. Randall Kane met her outside the Justice Building that afternoon. The clouds hung low. Rain threatened. You should take a break, he said. They've got the list. Let them chase the rest. I'm not tired, Mira replied. You will be. When the cameras leave, when the hearings end, that's when it hits. I'm already there. They stood in silence. He handed her a small thumb drive. Last piece. From an old tech I trusted. It links the ghost orders from your mission directly to Elbridge's prototype AI threat analysis system, the same system they sold to the DoD the following year. Mira took it without a word. That drive wasn't just a smoking gun. It was proof that the mission failure wasn't just a human error. It had been baked into a system sold for profit. Inside her apartment that evening, Mira sat down at her desk. The thumb drive held hundreds of documents, most of them technical, algorithmic threat assessments, deployment simulations, and auto-prioritization sequences. Buried inside was a time-stamped command chain from October 2008. The coordinates of her strike had been rerouted through the prototype, Project Blue Atlas. The system had flagged her unit as a risk based on a corrupted input string fed by a junior analyst. The AI had made the call. No human had overridden it, and they had covered it up to protect the system's rollout. Mira stared at the screen for a long time. They'd let her team burn to protect software. She compiled a new report. Short, clear, technical. Then she sent it to the DOJ Secretary Hayes and her DOJ liaison, Alana Rai, with a single subject line: proof of intent to suppress fatal flaw. Immediate danger to active systems. By morning, the DOJ had escalated the investigation to the White House. A presidential cybersecurity task force was formed. The Blue Atlas system was pulled from 6 Air Force bases and temporarily suspended from further implementation. The news cycle went into overdrive. Mira's name was once again everywhere. Some called her a hero. Others said she was dismantling national security. An op-ed in a major newspaper ran the headline, "When one scar disrupts an empire." She didn't read it. Instead, she met with Alana Reyes in a secure location, an unremarkable government office downtown, windowless, soundproofed. "You've just proven the most expensive defense contract in 5 years is based on a fatal decision engine," Alana said. "They'll come harder now." "They already are," Mira replied, sliding a printed photo across the table. It was taken the night before. Someone had broken into her car, opened the glove box, and left only one thing behind: her old pilot wings. Bent, blood-stained. Alana's face didn't change. "We're upping your security. You'll be moved to temporary housing under an alias until the inquiry concludes. I'm not hiding. You're not. You're surviving. There's a difference." That evening, Mira was relocated to a federal safe house, a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood near Annapolis. The windows were reinforced. Cameras covered every angle. She was given a new phone, a new laptop, and a cover job as a retired Navy consultant. The adjustment was jarring. Every part of her screamed against the idea of being sequestered. But Alana was right. She was no longer just a witness. She was a threat, not only to Elbridge, but to every system built to prioritize plausible deniability over accountability. To pass the time, Mira started reviewing other flagged drone missions from the last 15 years. With the help of a secure database Alana granted her access to, she found a pattern. Dozens of incidents with oddly similar language in the after-action reports: target misclassified, signal discrepancy, protocol override. Each time Blue Atlas or a precursor system had been involved. Each time the victims were either civilians, non-combatants, or allied operatives. Her scar was not the first, just the first to be seen. Late one night, Mira received an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "I was part of the Atlas team. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I have more. Meet me." Coordinates followed. An old library in Baltimore. Abandoned. Mira hesitated. It could be a trap. She showed the message to her security detail. They advised against going. She went anyway. Randall insisted on going with her. 2 others followed at a distance. Mira entered the building alone. Inside, under broken light, a young man stepped from the shadows. Early 30s, glasses, nervous energy. He introduced himself only as Cole. I was assigned to interface integrity on Blue Atlas, he said. I tried to flag the issue after the 2008 logs were deleted. They fired me. Put a clause on my exit. I signed it because I was scared, but after what you said in Congress, I can't stay quiet. He handed her a tablet. More logs, more test results. An internal memo marked urgent potential civilian targeting error rate at T7.4%. We ran simulations on patching it, Cole said, but they shelved it, said downtime wasn't worth the cost. Mira exhaled slowly. And now? Now they're trying to wipe what's left. I've got 36 hours before my access credentials are revoked completely. She looked him in the eye. Then we use every second. They did. By dawn, they'd copied every file, logged every anomaly, traced every chain of command. The Foundation wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Mira didn't sleep for the next 36 hours. She and Cole worked side by side in the safe house, poring over code fragments, linking field incidents to specific software malfunctions. Every hour revealed something worse, a field agent targeted by mistake because of a metadata mismatch, a medical transport drone reclassified as hostile, a school flagged for proximity to an unverified signal relay. Mira traced each error to the same flawed core, Blue Atlas. At 5 a.m. they uploaded the entire packet, code logs, communication trails, and internal memos, to the secure DOJ server. Cole stared at the screen after hitting send, his hands trembling. You just killed my career, he said quietly. Mira shook her head. No, you just saved lives. Alana Reyes called an hour later. Her voice was sharp, urgent. We've received the drop. DOJ is mobilizing a special counsel. This is now a criminal probe against Elbridge and several of its subcontractors. We need you both in protective custody immediately. By midday, both Mira and Cole were moved to a secure federal site outside D.C., a black site facility with guarded perimeters and underground offices. Mira was briefed by representatives from Homeland Security, the Air Force Inspector General's office, and the DOJ task force. Cole gave sworn testimony. He named names, gave passwords, disclosed the full range of Atlas-connected deployments. The investigation ballooned. That evening, Mira stepped outside for a brief breath of fresh air. Randall stood by the perimeter fence, watching the trees sway in the dusk wind. They're not going to let this end quietly, he said. No, but it's too big now to bury. Too many eyes. He nodded. They're going to push back in the only way they have left. How? Discredit, misinformation, smears. You know the drill. And he was right. The next day, an anonymous dossier appeared online. It accused Mira of falsifying records, questioned her service history, and even implied mental instability. A retired general who had once written her a commendation appeared on a fringe talk show, casting doubt on her motives. Mira watched the clip in silence, then turned off the screen. I'm not fighting ghosts anymore, she said to Randall. I'm fighting cowards. Within a week, congressional allies pushed back. The Senate Oversight Committee called an emergency session. Mira was invited again, this time not to testify, but to brief. In the chamber, she stood in front of a wide screen projecting a digital map of global incidents. Dots flared red across 5 continents. This is what Blue Atlas got wrong, she said. Every red mark is a misclassification. Everyone is a person who shouldn't have died. The room was silent. One senator spoke. You believe the system was intentionally released despite these flaws? Yes. The logs confirm it. Internal memos express concern, then shift to profitability models. Another senator and the military chain of command? Some objected. Most complied, a few profited. The briefing lasted 2 hours. When Mira stepped out, her phone buzzed. Cole. They're erasing me, he said. My credentials are wiped. My old apartment's been cleared. Someone accessed my cloud backup. Are you safe? I think so. For now, Mira didn't hesitate. She contacted Alana. Then Randall, within an hour, Cole was extracted from the safe house and moved again. Back at the federal site, Mira met with Secretary Hayes. "We're nearing the threshold," Hayes said. "The president's been briefed. If these findings hold, Elbridge's defense contracts will be terminated. Lawsuits will follow. Possibly indictments against high-level DoD officials. And me, you'll be pulled into the spotlight, not just as a witness, as a symbol." Mira didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "If they want a symbol, they better be ready for one that fights back." That night, Hayes made the announcement live. Blue Atlas was suspended indefinitely. All ongoing deployments were halted. A task force would be created to audit every mission tied to the program. The response was swift. Elbridge shares plummeted. Whistleblowers emerged from across the country. Families of victims began calling for a national reckoning. Mira received over 4,000 emails in 3 days, but among them was one that stood out. Subject line, "You're not finished." The message, "There's still one more name, one more command, find it." Attached was a voice file. It was a garbled audio log from 2008. Mira played it on repeat. Slowly, beneath the distortion, she heard it. Override command accepted. Authorization, Trident. She froze. Trident wasn't a project. It was a clearance level, one that bypassed every safeguard. Only 3 people in 2008 had Trident-level access, and she knew all 3. One was dead, one had retired, the third, Wait, is still active. Still in command, still hidden behind silence. Until now. Mira sat in the darkened room, headphones over her ears, playing the audio loop again and again. The word was unmistakable now. Trident. 3 syllables that cracked the shell of every lie she'd been fed. She dug through her old field training manuals, cross-referenced clearance levels from 2008, and pulled up archived staff rosters. 3 names. One was eliminated in a training accident. One is now a lobbyist with a trail of non-answers behind him. And the third, Major General Braden Lasker. Still active, still influential, still quiet. Lasker had served as Director of Strategic Systems Integration back then, the very post that oversaw experimental AI deployment. After Mira's unit was struck, Lasker released a statement praising the success of early autonomous threat identification. He'd gone on to chair the Blue Atlas Advisory Panel. Mira had seen his face on defense panels, always calm, always evasive. Now she couldn't unsee it. She called Alana Reyes immediately. "He's still in command?" Mira asked. "Technically, he oversees a new wing, Joint Future Threat Analysis. But yes, he's still operating inside the Pentagon. Then he's the one who authorized the override. He's the last chain." There was silence on the line. Then, "We'll need confirmation. You know that. I'll get it." The next morning, Mira made an unannounced appearance at the Office of Military Records under the pretense of reviewing her own file. With the help of a sympathetic archivist, an Air Force captain who had followed Mira's case closely, she requested system logs from October 2008 under classified archive tag 717 Alpha. They waited in silence as the request was processed. 10 minutes later, the screen flashed, access restricted, Trident-level authorization required. The captain frowned. That's not even supposed to trigger a traceable flag. It just did. Mira copied the screen. Proof. Not only did Lasker hold Trident clearance, he'd applied it to her mission's targeting system that exact day. Later that night, Mira met Randall and Alana at a secure DOJ briefing room. She laid the printout on the table. "He's the one. No one else could have overridden that system at that time." Alana nodded grimly. Then this just moved from corporate scandal to active military conspiracy. Randall leaned back, arms crossed. "We bring this to the president tonight. Will he believe it?" Mira asked. "He doesn't have a choice." The meeting in the West Wing happened behind 3 layers of security. Mira entered a narrow conference room flanked by 2 Secret Service agents. The president was already seated, along with the National Security Advisor, Secretary Hayes, and a legal team from the DOJ. Hayes made the introduction. Mira didn't need notes. She presented the override evidence, the Trident log, the timing, the clearance record. Then she played the audio. The president said nothing for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Are you willing to testify again against a currently serving general?" Mira's response was immediate. "Yes." Hayes spoke next. "We'll need to detain Lasker for questioning, but his clearance gives him layers of immunity. This won't be clean." The president stood. "Then make it loud." 2 days later, federal marshals and military police descended on a Pentagon sub-level facility. Major General Lasker was arrested without incident. His office was sealed. His devices were confiscated. He was escorted through the corridors as reporters snapped photos and aides pretended not to stare. The moment hit every major outlet within the hour. CNN, General arrested in ongoing Blue Atlas scandal. BBC, Trident override tied to friendly fire incident. Mira's name trended again. That night, Lasker's attorney released a statement claiming his client had acted under protocol, that the override had been mischaracterized, and that Mira Dawson was engaging in a personal crusade. The smear campaign reignited, but it was weaker this time. Public sentiment had shifted. Veterans groups posted side-by-side images, Mira's scar next to Lasker's public commendation photo. Hashtag Trident Brocus began trending. In private, Mira met with Cole. He looked exhausted but resolute. "They're trying to purge the old servers. I intercepted a command to wipe the legacy database. Can we stop it? Only one way. Get physical access." "To what?" "The cold room. Sub-level C, offsite archive, Delaware storage node." Mira didn't blink. "Then we go." Alana pushed back. "You're not an agent. You're a witness. Let the DOJ handle this. If we wait, they'll clean it. You know it." Hayes intervened. "You'll go, but not alone." The next morning, Mira, Cole, and 2 federal agents arrived at the Delaware storage facility, a nondescript concrete structure with no visible insignia. Mira wore body armor under a civilian jacket. Cole carried a custom drive. They entered through a secured side door. The hallway led to reinforced steel double doors labeled Sub-Level C. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly. Rows of server towers hummed with automated processing. Cole led them to rack 41B, this one. Mira and the agents watched as Cole connected his drive and began copying. Halfway through, the lights flickered. "What was that?" one agent asked. A voice crackled over the intercom. "You are in violation of federal storage protocol. Disconnect immediately." Cole kept copying. A siren began to wail. Mira stepped in front of the rack shielding Cole. The agents drew sidearms. Within minutes, facility security arrived, but were intercepted by DOJ marshals, already alerted by Alana from DC. After 20 tense minutes, the transfer was completed. Cole yanked the drive. "We got it," he said. Mira exhaled. Outside, the sun was just rising. The final piece was in their hands. They returned to DC, with the drive secured in an armored case. Mira sat silently beside Cole in the back of the transport van, her eyes fixed on the matte surface of the container as if it held the weight of the last 15 years, and in a way, it did. The cold room data was the final nail, not just in Elbridge's case, but in the entire system that had let it grow, unchecked and shielded. Once inside the DOJ's cybercrime division, the contents were uploaded into a classified terminal. It took several hours for the analysts to verify the integrity of the files. When they did, the room changed. Dozens of documents outlined a buried protocol known as Phantom Slate, a failsafe embedded inside Blue Atlas that allowed select Trident-level users to override identification parameters in real time. It had been used 9 times. 7 of those overrides resulted in friendly fire incidents, 2 in civilian deaths. Each override came with a voice authorization. 6 belonged to Lasker. The remaining 2 or 3 generals. By the next morning, the DOJ had issued warrants for both remaining Trident-level officials. Arrests were swift. 1 surrendered. 1 attempted to flee through a diplomatic channel in Brussels. He didn't make it. Elbridge's legal team went into full meltdown. Multiple board members resigned. Shareholders called for divestment. The Defense Department severed all remaining ties. The Blue Atlas program was officially dismantled. For Mira, there was no celebration, only motion. She spent most of her days in briefings, her nights writing responses to families of those harmed by the misfires, those she could find at least. Cole stayed close, helping the DOJ track secondary code traces and AI variants spun off from Atlas. They weren't gone, just dormant. Randall Kane approached her one afternoon as she sat on a bench outside the Justice Building. "You just brought down $1 billion empire," he said. "How does it feel?" Mira looked down at her hands. "Like I'm still carrying the pieces. That's what happens when you survive. You don't get to put it down, you just learn to carry it better." She didn't answer right away. "They're going to want to make a movie out of this," he added with a faint smile. "Then let them get the scar right." In early spring, Mira was invited to speak at the Air Force Academy. She declined, then reconsidered. She stood in front of a hall of cadets, some of whom had laughed at her months ago. Now they stood silently. She said only one thing: truth without action is just noise. Make it echo. Then she walked off stage. The applause was quiet, but real. Later that month, the president signed the Valor Integrity Reform Act. It mandated external audits of all AI-based combat systems, instituted whistleblower protections within military tech contracts, and created a permanent civilian oversight board. The bill carried Mira's name. She didn't attend the signing. She didn't need to. She was already somewhere else, chasing a new name that had surfaced in one of Cole's older logs. It wasn't over, and Mira Dawson wasn't done. The name that surfaced in Cole's logs wasn't familiar at first. It appeared as an oblique reference. LR Handler, see Segment 12, Helix Forkback. Most analysts had passed it off as a software artifact, but Mira didn't. She asked Cole to backtrace the original data path. It led to an encrypted file buried deep in a data stack labeled for deletion. The file name was generic, but the metadata contained GPS coordinates, one that pointed to a compound in Nevada, owned by a shell company with a single executive signer, Leonard Rhodes. The name clicked. Leonard Rhodes had once been a cybersecurity consultant embedded in Joint Base Langley Eustis. After 2008, he vanished from official records. Mira remembered his name only because he'd been the one who escorted her out of the infirmary after the Syria strike. Quiet, bland, forgettable by design. She brought the name to Alana Reyes. He was never officially part of Atlas, Mira said, but he was always there, just outside the official org charts. Alana frowned. We've seen that name before, linked to dark contracts, drone blacklists, peripheral surveillance tools, but no direct signature, always proxy access. Then we need to make it direct. They got a federal surveillance warrant within 48 hours. The Nevada property, ostensibly a communications testing site, was empty by the time agents arrived, wiped clean, but a single server remained active, hidden behind a thermal wall. Cole was flown in to assist with the extraction. What they recovered wasn't large, but it was precise. a series of rooted authorization tokens signed under Rhodes's credentials. 3 had triggered silent kill functions in Blue Atlas, one of which corresponded exactly to Mira's strike zone. He hadn't authorized the override. He had programmed the target classification. Rhodes hadn't vanished. He'd moved up, now operating under private security firms subcontracted by Elbridge's spin-off tech subsidiaries. He wasn't hiding, he was still working. Mira insisted on going to the field. Despite protests from Alana and the marshals, she traveled with a 4-person task force to the Denver Data Conference, where Rhodes was scheduled to appear as a panel guest on AI ethics. The irony didn't escape her. She watched from the side aisle as he took the stage. He looked different, grayer, heavier, but his voice was the same, calm, calculated, deliberate. When the panel ended, the marshals moved. Rhodes saw them and ran. He made it through the back corridor and into the underground parking garage before they cornered him. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't resist. But when Mira stepped into view, he froze. She looked him in the eye. 15 years. You engineered that scar. He said nothing, but his eyes twitched. Recognition, guilt, maybe both. They cuffed him and took him in. Rhodes's arrest didn't make major headlines at first. Too obscure, too technical. But within the community of survivors, whistleblowers and watchdogs, it was thunder. DOJ filed sealed indictments under a new classification, strategic deception via artificial proxy. Rhodes was the first charged under it. The hearing was scheduled for federal court. Cole met Mira at the cafe near Judiciary Square a day later. You did it again, he said. No, this time we did it with our eyes open. He nodded. Rhodes will flip, they always do. He'll say he wasn't the architect, that someone higher pushed the parameters. Then we keep climbing. Alana joined them minutes later with news. Rhodes submitted a partial plea agreement. He's willing to testify in exchange for leniency. He claims there was a higher level agreement, interagency, agreement pre-Atlas, something called the Osprey Directive. Mira narrowed her eyes. I've never heard of it. No one has. It's buried deep. Cole's already looking. Cole nodded grimly. It predates Blue Atlas, started as a NATO data sharing initiative, then morphed into a kill chain automation prototype. Rhodes says he was brought in to hardwire decision thresholds. That's how I got flagged, Mira said, not for who I was, but how the system read me. Yes. And if he's telling the truth, Atlas was just one child of a much older design. A chill ran through the air. They weren't done. They had just uncovered the seed. The Osprey Directive wasn't a program. It was a principle, written in the margins of a defense conference in Brussels in 2002. What started as a theoretical concept in multinational wargaming had quietly metastasized into a system of off-the-books agreements, cross-agency data swaps, and private sector experimentation with autonomous targeting frameworks. Mira, Alana, and Kolapord went through every file Rhodes had handed over as part of his plea agreement. There were memos, tech briefs, and the most damning, a video recording of a classified 2005 roundtable at a NATO advisory meeting. The camera angle was poor, the audio scratchy, but one voice came through clearly. We must eliminate latency in lethal decisions. Emotion is a delay. Pattern recognition must supersede protocol. The speaker, a man named Victor Hanlon, retired Air Force general, former deputy director of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, now a board member at Trintech Systems, a parent company of Elbridge. Cole traced Hanlon's name through the Osprey archives. Over 20 references. His signature appeared on a classified funding memo for the precursor to Blue Atlas. More concerning, he'd signed a directive authorizing autonomous test runs in conflict zones without public or allied oversight. Yemen, Ukraine, northwest Pakistan. Mira stared at the screen. This was never about just one system. Atlas wasn't a failure, it was a blueprint. Alana looked grim. Hanlon can't be touched easily. He's a civilian now, with layers of indemnity and political protection. But if we can link him directly to the targeting decisions. Then he engineered the first chain reaction. Cole chimed in. There's one more thread. He maintained a private server separate from Trintex, housed overseas. I think it has the original kill chain test logs. Can we reach it? We'll need a black warrant and a cybersecurity strike team. Fast. They briefed Secretary Hayes that evening. She listened without interrupting. When Mira finished, Hayes tapped a pen against her desk. I fought a lot of bureaucracies, but this is different. Hanlon built a ghost protocol. He used alliances as cover, national interest as armor. We have the angle, Alana said. His server is based in Luxembourg. We have treaty options if we move fast. Hayes nodded. Do it, quietly. I'll talk to State. 2 days later, a joint cyber task force led by the DOJ and the European Cybercrime Center raided a data center in Luxembourg. They seized Hanlon's off-grid server farm. Dozens of drives were shipped back under diplomatic seal. Inside, the truth unraveled. The logs showed Hanlon had authorized test strikes on falsified targets to demonstrate system efficiency. Civilian heat signatures were deliberately reclassified in field simulations. One scenario had targeted a hospital under the pretense of suppressing a rebel stronghold. Hanlon's notes referred to it as a tolerable delta. Mira read the lines aloud in the DOJ conference room. Her voice didn't shake. The room did. The president was briefed within hours. Hanlon was summoned to appear before a federal oversight committee. He declined. He issued a video statement insisting all his actions were within the scope of experimental research and that strategic deterrence sometimes requires uncomfortable innovation. Mira watched the clip and said nothing. Instead, she filed an affidavit for direct testimony, not just about Blue Atlas, but about Osprey, about the layers behind the lie, Alana warned her. This will be a political explosion. You'll make enemies that don't operate on the record. I already have. Now I'm naming them. The committee chamber was larger this time. Cameras were forbidden, only official transcripts. Mira sat at the witness table, flanked by DOJ counsel. She read from a prepared statement for the first time. I was wounded by a drone programmed to act without human confirmation. But the wound wasn't just physical, it was policy deep. It was authorized by a system born in shadows, defended by silence, and concealed behind bureaucracy. The Osprey directive wasn't an accident. It was a decision, 100 decisions, made by men who believed that delay was weakness, that empathy was inefficiency, that oversight was optional. I lived. Many didn't. The silence in the room was longer than the applause in any. She answered questions for 4 hours, cited dates, named roles, drew lines between Trintec, Elbridge, and Hanlon, laid the foundation for a legal assault. Outside, reporters waited. None were allowed inside. But the transcript leaked within 12 hours. Public backlash erupted. Vigils for drone strike victims emerged across college campuses. Military blogs are filled with debate. Defense lobbyists issued denials. The House Armed Services Committee called for a full audit. And Victor Hanlon disappeared. For 3 days, no one knew where he was. Then on the 4th morning, Mira received a package. No name, no return address. Inside, a black USB drive and a note. Not all ghosts die in silence. The black USB drive sat on Mira's desk for hours before she touched it. She ran 3 different scans for malware, cross-checked the firmware against known exploits, and finally, with a secure air-gapped machine, opened its contents. There was only one folder. Inside, 6 video files dated from 2003 to 2008. All were labeled simply Directive. She opened the first. A low-resolution feed showed a dark conference room. 8 men are seated around a table. At the head, Victor Hanlon. They discussed early AI targeting logic, layered heuristics, and cross-agency data ingestion. One line stood out, spoken by Hanlon himself: "Every delay is an opportunity cost in war. We can't afford ethics that arrive late." The second video was worse. Footage of a classified test in Yemen. A drone camera showed a building tagged as hostile. In the corner of the screen, an analyst quietly whispered, "But the signal's not confirmed." Hanlon's voice replied, "Off camera, run it anyway. We need a data curve." The missile struck. Smoke filled the screen. File 3 showed Rhodes confirming back-end access integration with Elbridge's data centers. The voiceover discussed using NATO metadata to reinforce preemptive pattern classification. File 4 showed a presentation titled Emotion Threshold Suppression. It detailed efforts to identify and remove bias, specifically compassion, from autonomous decision models. One slide read, "Resolve is cleanest without conscience." Mira sat motionless. The fifth video was from October 2008. Her strike. A command console showed her squad's coordinates, flashing red for unknown reasons. The voice she now knew was Rhodes said, "We've got a grey flag. Uncertain friend or foe." Hanlon, "Don't wait." Rhodes, "But she's pinging friendly." Hanlon, "Then the system's wrong. Or she is." Seconds later, the screen flashed white. The sixth file was different. A recording dated 5 days after Mira's discharge. Hanlon spoke directly to the camera, alone. "They'll bury this. They always do. But if one of them walks away, if even one comes back, then the math changes. Guilt is a terrible algorithm." He looked away. Then the recording ended. Mira delivered the drive to Alana Reyes. By midnight, the DOJ had secured a warrant for Hanlon's arrest on charges of conspiracy, war crimes under international statute, and obstruction of oversight. Interpol issued a red notice. Hanlon was located 3 days later in Tangiers. He surrendered without incident. He didn't speak a word, but the videos did. They were shown in closed committee sessions, then declassified. Public outrage exploded. An international tribunal requested extradition. The Pentagon released a public apology. The president delivered a national address. Mira was asked to attend. She declined. Instead, she visited the families of her squad. One by one, she gave each a copy of the final video. She said the words none of them had heard before: "I'm sorry. They lied to you. They lied to us. But it ends now." Some cried. Some stared. One hugged her for a long time without speaking. It wasn't absolution. It was the start of memory reclaimed. That night, Mira stood alone at the Arlington Air Force Memorial. Same spot, same arc, same silence. But this time she wore her uniform, not for validation, for those who couldn't. As dawn broke, she placed a folded copy of the Osprey Directive summary under a marble bench, then walked away, not because it was over, but because it had finally begun to mean something. Mira returned to DC with the weight of the final video still sitting in her bones. The tribunal in The Hague was moving forward with a special session to consider war crimes charges against Hanlon and 3 of his associates. For the first time in history, a civilian AI strategist would face an international court for decisions made inside code. But inside the US, a different storm brewed. The Department of Defense, battered by scandal, began its own housecleaning. 10 officials were suspended, 5 resigned. A commission was formed to re-examine all AI-based targeting systems used over the past 20 years. Mira was invited to join. She accepted. On her first day inside the commission chambers, she found herself seated across from men who had signed off on her silence. They avoided eye contact. Mira didn't offer them any. Cole was named lead technical advisor. Alana Reyes was appointed special liaison to the DOJ. Randall declined any official position, but he showed up every week, sitting in the gallery like a sentinel. For 3 weeks, they reviewed systems, examined kill chain logic. Mira asked the same question in every case: where's the human in this decision? More often than not, the answer was absent. One afternoon during a closed-door technical review, Cole presented a new revelation. The Atlas system had been mirrored. A private defense group, Darbridge Dynamics, had quietly copied Blue Atlas's architecture and adapted it for law enforcement analytics, predictive policing, city surveillance, and automated warrant triggers. Mira froze. "You're saying the same logic that misread my team is now flagging civilians?" "Yes," Cole said, "and it's operational in 7 states, under different names." Mira looked at Alana. Alana sighed. "This isn't a cleanup, it's a contagion." The commission requested emergency jurisdiction expansion. Hearings doubled. Mira found herself pulled between justice for the past and urgency for the present. She was exhausted, but she never missed a day. Meanwhile, Hanlon's trial opened in The Hague. Footage of Mira's scar, taken years earlier, was shown beside the drone logs. The prosecution played the 6th video from the black USB. When Hanlon's face appeared, confessing the weight of his choices, the courtroom hushed. Hanlon's defense tried to claim intellectual abstraction, that he had designed the strategy, not the execution. But the logs were clear. The decisions were real. Mira's testimony, submitted by video, cut through the rhetoric. He said latency was a weakness. But hesitation is not failure, it's humanity. He killed that. We paid for it. The verdict came in 4 days later. Guilty. On all counts. The court sentenced Hanlon to life in international detention without parole. His accomplices received decades. It was a moment, but Mira didn't celebrate. Instead, she stood before the Oversight Commission and made one final proposal: dismantle all legacy code from Blue Atlas, Osprey, and their derivatives. Not just decommission, erase, purge the architecture. They're not systems, she said. They're shadows, and shadows remember how to reform. A vote passed 11-1. One of the men who voted against it approached her afterward. "You know this puts us years behind," he said. "No," Mira replied. "It puts us back on track, with people, not programs." Weeks later, Mira visited her old flight academy. They'd named a wing after her. She laughed, then cried. Inside, she spoke to the new class of cadets. When you sit behind a console or a cockpit or a screen, ask yourself what you're not seeing, then wait a second longer. Sometimes the most heroic thing you'll do is hesitate. They listened and took notes. It was enough. Late that night, Mira walked the National Mall, quiet, empty. The Capitol lights glowed behind scaffolding, a symbol of rebuilding. She carried one item in her jacket pocket, the bent dog tag from her strike zone. She held it in her palm, thumb brushing the scratched words, still standing. Then she sat on the edge of the reflecting pool, looked into the water, and let the silence settle. Not to erase, but to remember, and to ready herself for the work still to come. 6 months later, Mira stood in front of a white wall inside a museum that hadn't existed a year earlier. The National Center for Ethical Technology had opened in D.C. with little fanfare but immense intention. Funded jointly by civilian watchdogs, military ethics foundations, and international human rights coalitions, the center was designed to do what no algorithm ever could. Remember, in the center of its main exhibit, under clean glass, was a burned flight vest, Mira's. Next to it, a transcript from her testimony, and beside that, a rotating screen that played select clips from the Osprey directive hearings, including Hanlon's final recorded words. "If even one comes back, the math changes." A young girl in a ROTC shirt stood nearby, reading silently. When she noticed Mira, her eyes widened. "You're her." Mira nodded. The girl hesitated, then said, "Thank you for not stopping." Mira didn't respond immediately, then she smiled. "I didn't know how." Outside, the city moved as it always did. Headlines, hearings, lobbyists, debates. But for once, Mira felt something she hadn't in years: equilibrium. The tribunal had concluded. The Oversight Commission's work had transitioned into permanent regulatory review. Cole had accepted a position leading AI integrity at a global ethics lab. Randall had retired to Colorado. Alana remained in government, quietly steering reforms Mira would never see credited. She sent Mira one text each week, always the same 3 words: "Still watching." Always. On a clear fall morning, Mira boarded a transport to Ramstein Air Base. She had been invited to speak to NATO Command, not as a veteran, but as a survivor. Her presentation lasted 20 minutes. Her closing slide bore no bullet points. Just one sentence: "What you automate, you must still answer for." They stood in silence when she finished. One general saluted. She didn't return it. She simply nodded. Then she left. Back home, Mira took to walking in the mornings. No more press, no more meetings, just air, movement, space. Her scar no longer pulled. The silence inside her was not gone, but it no longer screamed. She received letters from survivors, from policymakers, from parents. One came from the sister of a technician who had worked on the earliest Blue Atlas prototypes. "He always said something felt wrong," it read. "But he was afraid of being labeled disloyal. He would have followed you." Mira placed the letter next to a dog tag in a cedar box on her bookshelf, then closed the lid. Not to forget, but to honor. On the anniversary of the strike, she returned once more to Arlington. Same bench, same view. Only this time there was someone waiting, the cadet who had once laughed at her scar. He stood when he saw her, straight-backed. Older now, his voice was clear. "I'm sorry." Mira looked at him, then said, "Don't be, just do better." He nodded, then left. Mira sat alone as the sun rose behind the memorial arc. She didn't speak, she didn't move, but in the stillness there was peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of truth. And that, finally, was enough. They called it a scar. But in the years that followed, that scar became a signature. From the halls of justice to the pages of training manuals, Mira Dawson's story changed more than one system. It shifted a mindset. The AI Oversight Act passed unanimously. Former whistleblowers were reinstated and protected, and in flight schools from Texas to Tallinn, cadets are now taught the Dawson Clause, a human override built not into code but into culture, because Mira didn't just survive the blast. She rewrote the rulebook on what comes after. Some stories don't end with justice, they end with memory. For Captain Mira Dawson, survival was never just about living through a blast. It was about walking through silence, through denial, through systems designed not to protect, but to forget. For 15 years she carried a scar the military refused to acknowledge, until the day a cadet's careless whisper and a general's overdue confession cracked the silence wide open. What followed was more than just a reckoning. It was a redefinition of honor, of accountability, of the very architecture of war. Mira didn't set out to become a symbol, she didn't wear medals, she didn't ask for statues, but she stood, again and again, in hearing rooms, in locked archives, in front of senators, survivors, and systems that had been built to ignore her. And every time she stood, something shifted, because the scar on her chest wasn't just tissue. It was evidence, it was testimony, it was proof that what was buried could still breathe. She wasn't alone. Cole, the reluctant technician turned whistleblower, stood with her. Alana, the prosecutor who never blinked, cleared the path. Randall, once a commander, now a quiet sentinel, gave her the space to move forward without forgetting where she came from. Together, they made a machine, but more than that, they built something new in its place, a watchdog infrastructure, a tribunal precedent, a civilian ethics museum, and most importantly, a generation of young minds, cadets, developers, lawmakers, who now carry one simple lesson: that speed does not replace conscience, that automation is not absolution, that silence is not a strategy. At the National Center for Ethical Technology, Mira's flight vest rests under glass, not as a trophy, but as a question. What will you choose when the system says fire and your gut says wait? Because somewhere out there, another directive is being written, another scar is being born, and someone someday will have to stand. Will it be you? We want to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you most about Mira's journey? What moments lingered after the story faded to black? Leave us a comment below. Let's talk about how stories like this help us re-examine justice, humanity, and the cost of silence. And if stories like this matter to you, stories of resilience, truth, and unsung strength, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Biker. Because here, memory isn't a wound, it's a warning and a way forward. We'll see you in the next story.